Renny Show is brought to you by Johnston Group, Vittorio Rossi, Trans-Canada Brewing, Lou Ferlin, Cambrian Credit Union, and Homefield.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Wiebe from Sportsnet. Together, we are Kenny and Renny. This is the Kenny and Renny post-game show that we've been trying to get up for a really long time here, running into a whole bunch of issues. I'm currently stuck in a hotel room in Toronto after a delay has kept me from making it back to Winnipeg tonight. Hopefully, I'll be back in time for free agency coverage tomorrow. I know that Ken Wiebe is going to be there because he is already there back in Winnipeg. So hopefully that'll come together. We're trying to make this happen for you. I know that things were scheduled for a little bit earlier. I see by the comments in the show, people had showed up. There was a little bit of frustration. I totally get the frustration. I get it. We apologize for not being able to get the show together at a certain time. Flight delays. I was in the air for a lot of it, trying to figure out how I was going to get home for a lot of it. But we wanted to get this up for everybody today because what we've wanted to do with these pop-up shows is kind of be able to be reactionary and jump in and weigh in on the stuff that needs to be weighed on when it's time. And most definitely, the end of the Blake Wheeler era in Winnipeg is something that we should be gathering and having a conversation about. Massive news, absolutely massive news today. Not something that we weren't expecting. If you were watching our last Kenny and Renny show yesterday, Elliot Friedman was on the show and told us as much that was going to happen. There was an expectation that Blake Wheeler was going to be bought out. That's what happened, put on waivers for the purpose of being bought out. This is all but done. You saw the tribute videos that the Winnipeg Jets put out. You saw essentially the goodbye video by Blake Wheeler on the way out. Something we'll have to talk about here is the way they've handled this. I mean, as far as buyouts go, this is essentially as friendly as you could imagine it being. This is no surprise. This would have been conversations that happened going forward. I mean, a lot of people have noticed over the last number of days, it was sent to me by a bunch of people that Blake Wheeler had put his house up for sale. The fact that he was in for that video, and basically when the news dropped, so too did the video of Blake Wheeler thanking the city of Winnipeg for his time here in Winnipeg and telling the people of Winnipeg what they meant to him. That was something that was clearly planned. So this is a conversation that's been happening between the Winnipeg Jets, Kevin Cheveldayoff and Blake Wheeler. I'm guessing Mark Chipman and Blake Wheeler, everyone in that organization, and Blake Wheeler for a long time, that they were going down this path. We'll get into the whys, the hows, the where he could potentially end up, the ramifications of this. Was this the right decision? All those different kind of things are things worth diving into and talking about. I'd love to dive into it. And when I go swimming and diving into the deep end of the pool, I like to do it with my good buddy, Ken Wiebe. He's kind of like the lifeguard in my life, tries to keep me out of trouble. Doesn't do a very good job of it, but don't worry about it. We're going to see how he does here today. Let's bring in the man with the best music in the business. Here comes Kenny. Kenny, we've always talked about it. The people who listen to this show like to keep us accountable. It's one of the things I love about this show, keeping us accountable. I absolutely love this comment from Waiters27, who says, "Am I late or am I early?" And Lynn Reimer says, "You're both, Waiters." This is a totally true statement. All over the place here. One of the nature of what we're trying to do here with these pop-up shows is that it's hard to do a pop-up show with no internet when you're flying over the Great Lakes like I was earlier today. We're trying to get this done, trying to get a show on record here. So glad for all of you who've had the patience to join us. I know it's been frustrating, but thank you so much. We're going to do our best to make sure that it's worth your time to show up here, and we appreciate you being here. So let's get at it, Ken. Not surprising news.
First of all, lifeguard, man. I mean, I'm happy to do. I'm already your life coach. Now I got to be your lifeguard. I mean, other duties as assigned. Hey, buddy, that's what we're gonna go with. I know you've had a long travel day. People in the chat have no idea how long Sean's travel day has been so far. A three-legged stop has turned into two in an overnight, and he's still grinding through here. Not only is he playing through the split lip, he's playing hard today. It's good. It's good.
Yeah,
well done.
I was going to say, if you didn't know that you were going to be both the life coach and the lifeguard, you probably should have read the fine print on our marriage contract, but that's
okay.
Your fault for not
no problem. I didn't say I wouldn't do it. I just said I wasn't aware of that until right now, but I know you like to keep me on my toes. It's good.
Or
it's good.
Representation
and
from your agent.
Sean's also being polite here. I had a graduation barbecue to attend. We know it's a big week for a lot of folks around the province and around Canada, so Caden Adolph, congratulations on your graduation. But yeah, it was partly my fault. We couldn't get up earlier either, so it was very kind of him to fall on the sword. But it is also partly my fault. But hey, we're here now. Let's dive in. Let's to discuss.
Get into it. Yeah. So Ken, I mean, I thought that this was pretty good. I mean, it's funny. There's always like, who's going to break this news? Who's going to break this news? I mean, the thing about this is one of those things where I kind of think like, the breaking news angle of this is almost a little bit silly in the way that like we had Elliot Friedman on our show yesterday telling us that this is going to happen. Sure enough, it did happen. Clearly, this isn't a surprise because of the nature of how this was rolled out with the PR team and the social media team for the Winnipeg Jets having so much content ready to go when they dropped this announcement. Like this comes across more like an announcement the way the Jets have made it like a retirement by a player that's being celebrated by the organization rather than a player who's being asked to leave the organization before he was contractually supposed to. This is a much different I don't want to call it a divorce, or if it is a divorce,
it's a divorce.
Yeah, it's one of those divorces that is just absolutely, as harmonious as can be. This isn't the Matt Duchene Nashville Predators divorce that we're seeing down the highway in the Central Division. Give me your idea of what was going through your head when this finally happened.
Yeah, I mean, timing was everything. This is something we've been waiting for throughout the course of the week, Sean. I mean, we know. I mean, the moment you were in the conversation, the moment Kevin Cheveldayoff admitted and used the word buyout in one of the answers, we knew. I mean, unless there was a Hail Mary trade to be had, and for those people asking, we should just get into this quickly before we dig into the nuts and bolts. But the reason why Blake Wheeler was not tried to be traded at 50%. Is because the asset that would have had to have been attached to that 50% would have been too high. I mean, if you look at teams and saying, oh, well, this guy did this for that, well, it's not that simple. I mean, Blake had an excellent year point-wise. 55 points as a 36-year-old is an outstanding year. Blake's going to be 37 coming up here. That's not to say he can't be a productive player, but his role needed to be diminished. And as I wrote in my column last Friday, I mean, it sounds odd to some, but I don't think it would have been as easy for Blake to just roll in as a fourth or a third liner here, which is probably what he's going to do in his next stop based on what he's done over the course of those 12 seasons. Now, we'll get into maybe potential landing spots in a minute, but in terms of the Jets buying him out, what it means right now is this. They will pay 2/3 of the $8.25 that he was owed next season in the final year of that 5-year deal. They are able to split that $5.5 million over 2 years, which means 2.75 counting against the cap for the next 2 years. So yes, there are some initial savings, but the Jets are also going to have to plug in a top 6 player between that 8.25 and the 2.75 that is already being counted against the cap for a player who will not be playing for the Winnipeg Jets. So it's not as easy as saying the Jets are saving just over $5 million. So that's one thing that needs to be considered. The other thing that needs to be considered, Sean, 2 of the 3 players acquired from the LA Kings in the Pierre-Luc Dubois deal, which was a good deal, those players need new contracts. And Gabe Vilardi is in for a significant raise after producing 23 goals and 41 points. So a chunk of that money is going to go to him initially. And then Rasmus Kupari is also going to need a new deal along with Dylan Sandberg and Morgan Barron and the remainder of the RFAs that were given qualifying offers today. So in terms of the rollout, super interesting because, Sean, we've been waiting for this. We kind of almost wondered if it would happen earlier. Obviously, Kevin Cheveldayoff tried until the very end to get a trade that might work. Even there was also some talk about maybe a second team would get involved, take on half the 50% of the contract, and also then buy out Wheeler the way Kyler Yamamoto was bought out. So that obviously didn't happen and couldn't happen. So now we are where we are. What that means in terms of the rollout, timing is interesting. I wondered if the Jets would wait almost right up until the 4 p.m. deadline, Sean, didn't you? I mean, when it took this long, I thought it might roll out a little bit later in the day. When it rolled in about 10:30 or so, the timing was a little bit surprising. The fact that they got Blake to, provide a message, which, it looked like it was pretty heartfelt. Certainly a classy gesture by Wheeler. But yeah, I mean, it on the surface, they want to make it look as amicable as possible. And what we knew is that the Jets would want to make it as seamless a transition as possible, because let's not kid ourselves. When a former captain has to be bought out in the last year of a contract and a team is going to pay him $5.5 million to not play for them, despite the fact he's littered across all of the record book, that's not as harmonious as they tried to make it look today. I mean, do the Jets appreciate his contributions? Of course they do. Does Blake appreciate all the cheers that he heard over those 12 years? Of course he does. But we're not going to pretend that this is the way the Jets or Blake Wheeler wanted his tenure to end. There's no way either side wanted it to end this way, but breakups are difficult and they're rarely not messy. So that's where they are. I applaud both sides for putting on a happy face and trying to do this as easy as possible. And yeah, like I said, I think that all sides are being genuine in their commentary, but that's not to say it is a smooth thing for either side. I mean, of course, Blake Wheeler didn't want to be bought out. I mean, by the end, did he want a change of scenery? Yes, we know they talked about that last year already and couldn't find a solution. Do I expect Blake to continue to play? Yes, I do. There was a time, Sean, when, I had told you I didn't think he would finish the contract and I wasn't sure he would play again next year. Based on the message, although he didn't give any hints that he would continue playing, I sure felt like he'll be looking at trying to play again next year. Yeah. And knowing Blake after covering him for 12 years, he will be carrying around an enormous chip on his shoulder, whether he says that publicly or not. He's definitely going to try and prove to the Winnipeg Jets that they made a mistake and that he could have another productive season. Now, does that mean the Jets shouldn't have done what they did today? No, it was time. We talked about this plenty. It was time for a new direction. Blake Wheeler will be thanked for his contributions. His number, I think, will be 26, will go to the rafters one day. He will be celebrated when he returns. He'll get a longer video than some of the previous players have rolled through. But it was time for both sides to move along. The Jets are going in it, whether we call this 2.1 or 3.0, it's time to move along from what we have been talking about. We know that, I'm going to turn it back to you. We've got lots more to discuss, but those are my feelings. I thought both sides handled the press release fine today, well in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of stuff that has been left unsaid, and we know that Kevin Cheveldayoff isn't going to say it, and I don't know that Blake Wheeler is going to say it, though he was a little bit more forthcoming last year when he was stripped of the captaincy than I expected him to be. But at the end of the day, it was time for both sides to have a divorce. Whether you want to make it amicable or not, it was time for both sides to move on. And now they are moving on officially at 11 o'clock tomorrow.
See, I think that's the thing here, Ken, is like, I know, neither side wanted it to end this way. And the one thing about Blake Wheeler's a really smart guy, right? We know that.
Absolutely.
I think from what you talked about, the fact that they explored the possibility of Blake Wheeler not being here last year, him coming back, him being stripped of the season going how it did, the season ending how it did, there was no bring Blake Wheeler back into this room. That was evidently clear. And it's funny, I had some conversations with at least one journalist when I was down at the draft, and they had talked about an appearance I'd had on Winnipeg Sports Talk, where I talked about Wheeler and some of the other players, and they'd said, you just seem so done with those guys, right? They said in the commentary, and I was thinking, I never want to look like I'm done with Blake Wheeler. It's not that. It's that the doneness that you're probably hearing in my voice is that I knew Blake Wheeler couldn't come back. I knew he couldn't come back. Last year, he could come back. Last year, I was one of the people who suggested that he would be back. And the reason I suggested he would be back was not that he wasn't going to get shopped around the league. I didn't think anyone would want him on that price tag. And when we get into it, for some of the reasons that he's being bought out here today, you touched on it. Blake Wheeler isn't being bought out because he's not a productive player. Okay. Like you said, the amount of points he had this year, it's not worth $8.25 million, but it's not the kind of contract that people take a look at and say, my God, we got to get rid of this. It's just bringing us down. It's not getting the value. It's other issues with that. But to me, I knew at that moment, and I think Blake Wheeler knew at that moment when he came out and talked about Rick Bowness the way that he did at the year-end press conference. That was someone who was saying, I'm not going to be back in this room, so I'm going to say whatever the heck I want to at this. Nicely done, Eric. So I knew he was gone. So if people have been listening to me and thinking that I'm done with players, it's not a fatigue or me being tired of or being like, I don't want to talk about these players anymore. It's that in my mind, like I knew you could not bring Blake Wheeler back into the room after the way things ended. And I think part of that is based on the idea that I knew Blake Wheeler felt that way as well. So yeah, is Blake Wheeler going to be excited about the idea that he got bought out at the end of his contract? I don't think anyone ever wants to get bought out. I think that there's always a little bit of, it's not, the reverse of a badge of honor. It's not a badge of shame, but it's definitely one of those things where I love this line, and a good buddy of mine texted me this today, and it always stood out to me in Moneyball, that line when David Justice is talking with Billy Beane, and he says, you pay me $10 million to do this, just stay out of my way. And Billy Beane responds and says, $5 million. I pay you $5 million a year to play here. The New York Yankees, they pay you $5 million not to play for them. That's what they think of you, right? And I always thought that line is that thing when I thought once you've seen that, once you've taken that in and dollars to donuts, I'd put money on it that Blake Wheeler has watched Moneyball. I don't think you can be a professional athlete, watch that and hear that, and not hear that in the back of the head when you get bought out, that a team is going to pay you to go away, and what that comes to the idea of the chip on your shoulder that you're talking about. But all that said, I do think that Blake Wheeler, probably a smart guy, saw this coming, knows that it was coming, and is thinking in the end here he's moving on. He's saying, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the money that I get out of this, and I'm going to walk away from this situation. I'm going to try and recoup as much of it as I can down the road here. But I don't think Blake Wheeler was fighting to stick around. You're not going to see any fingernail marks on the jams of the door that Blake Wheeler left behind on the way out of here. I think he was more than happy to move on when this situation happened. This is, it's another way of me saying it's a divorce, no doubt. But in the end, I think this is a divorce where both sides realize, listen, this relationship cannot go on. We appreciate each other for what we've given to each other in the past. There's no more to give. We're done here. I'm on the way out the door. And so when you characterize it the way that you did, I agree with that. I don't think there's a level of acrimony here that exists in the buyout happening. I think Blake was more than happy to do those videos. I think they very openly talked about this. And like, this is the divorce where people sit down and they say, this is what's best for the kids. This is what's best for this. This is what's best for that. And we're going to stand up and we're going to give one last hug, one last pat on the shoulder. And then we're going to turn around and we're going to go our separate ways. And that's how they handled it. I mean, something to be said about them handling it in this manner. But But this is, to me, again, I go back to this, when this breaking news happens, Elliot Friedman told us this was happening yesterday. He knew this. A lot of other people knew this was going to happen. We knew it was going to be happening. You touched on it, Ken. As soon as the words came out of Kevin Cheveldayoff's mouth, a guy who loves wasting no words, when he said those, you knew that it was happening. So this was the expected conclusion. And to be honest, the way they rolled it out was done so in very Winnipeg Jets style.
Oh, absolutely. And let's also discuss this part here. Blake was one of the first players to buy a home in this city. He made a commitment here. He joined golf clubs in the town. He wanted his family here. He spoke very openly when a certain other president was running the United States where he is from. It was important to him. He put down roots here, and his family made a massive impact in the community. Him and Sam did a lot of great things in the community, and no one is ignoring those things. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, it was time for both sides to move on, and Blake is wanting to chase a Stanley Cup, and he will I expect him to have an opportunity to do that somewhere else. I mean, we'll get into the potential landing spots in a minute, but yeah, I mean, make no mistake, some people who think we're being negative. I mean, no one is ignoring what Blake did in the community. Blake gave a lot to the community. He gave a lot to the organization. He gave his prime years to a place where a lot of people weren't willing to commit. He did make a commitment. And for the people that are saying he was overpaid at 8.25, don't ignore the lengthy time before that where he was wildly underpaid. So again, I don't want to hear about, Jets made this massive mistake signing him at 30 to an extension. This was always going to be a terrible turnout. The guy had back-to-back 91-point seasons, was an all-star, did a lot of great things on the ice for this organization. Yeah. And for those things, he will be applauded for long after he is gone. I mean, like I said, I don't think we're in statue territory, but he will be one of the best Jets of the 2.0 era. No one is disputing that. And if you are, you should look a little closer at what happened during the last 12 seasons. Blake missed out on the 2011 Boston Cup when he was traded to Atlanta. It is a subject that is, slightly uncomfortable to him. It is emotional. And now he's going to try to chase a cup with another team. Now, what will that mean? Will he be paid $2 million? Will he be paid $3 million? I'm not sure. But we know there's not a ton of money going around. Blake's made a lot of money in his career. I think he's going to choose the best spot for him that he believes that has a chance. I do think there will be a tug towards the Minnesota Wild. Will it be tough for them? I could easily see Blake Wheeler playing on the third line with Marcus Foligno on a $2 million contract for a team that has almost $15 million in dead cap money. Blake told me many times his dream as a high school player was to be a Minnesota Golden Gopher. He didn't even have dreams of being in the NHL until he was drafted by the then Phoenix Coyotes. The chance to play at home, no, it wasn't the North Stars, but a chance to play at home, I think, is probably going to be appealing to him. Our colleague Elliot Friedman mentioned the Pittsburgh Penguins as a potential landing spot. Darren Dreger mentioned the Dallas Stars today. I mentioned the Carolina Hurricanes. I wonder if that might fit there, seeing what Paul Stastny did with Rod Brind'Amour this year. Does he play that back pressure game? I think that he could still be an important third line cog of the wheel. I don't think he has to go into Corey Perry territory yet where he needs to play, 50 or 60 games. But as a 14-minute player, I think Blake can be highly effective. Still be on a second power play and then see what happens. So those are some of the teams that I think. I do not see a reunion with the Boston Bruins, nor do I see a reunion with Paul Maurice and the Florida Panthers. Those are my top choices. What about you, Sean?
Of where he goes, you know what? I can tell you this. I thought that team exactly. I thought the Carolina Hurricanes was a team that maybe that's one of the places that you go. I actually, though, think the way things ended up with Paul Stastny, that potentially it would be less likely. Like the Paul
pretty
Stastny
important
connection.
Playoff player, though. He played pretty well there in the playoffs for them. Pretty impactful player.
I know. No, I'm saying I think that the way things ended here and things that I hear about the way that there's potential talk of players about the Jets room, I don't know that I don't know 100% that Paul Stastny would be saying this is a guy you need to bring in here right now.
Blake
is
and
what
Paul
I'm
are very
suggesting.
tight, Sean. They're very tight. I would expect them to
they're
be
very tight. And I'm saying I wouldn't expect that, to be honest.
Okay.
From some of the things that I've heard, and I can't get into it, and that's just my take from things that have been somewhere. But I don't know that he would be saying this is the missing
fair
chip. This is what we need. He needs to be here. Let's get into this. And the reasoning here. Like let's tackle the obvious thing in the room here. I know there was a comment that was made here. Lori Loving Life says, I really hope this isn't going to be a totally negative show because I'm tired of the negativity. Okay, Lori, I'm going to tell you right now, I can't promise you positivity. I can't promise you negativity. I can promise that I'm going to tell you exactly what I think about this situation. I'm hoping that that's good enough for you. I'm not here to, I'm just telling you like it is. I'm not here to beat up on things. Ken kind of touched on this earlier. This is what I take away from Blake Wheeler. I go further than Ken. I think, in my mind, there is no Winnipeg Jet player that was more impactful, that was better than Blake Wheeler. Blake Wheeler, in my mind, is above all else as the best hockey player that the Winnipeg Jets 2.0 had. He's better than Buff. He's better than Helly. He's better than Scheif. At his absolute peak, this is what I will remember Blake Wheeler for. I remember I was with CBC News, and I covered the Jets' first game back. And I was down at ice level. And I watched Blake Wheeler play, and I thought, this guy, like 6'5", that big, this size, those hands, if he can put that all together, he's going to be freaking stoppable. And for a while, he did put it together. Paul Maurice came in. He's one of the guys I give Paul Maurice credit for taking to that extra level of his game. But the tools that Blake Wheeler had are unlike the tools we've seen a player have before. You take a guy like Tage Thompson, who's as big as he is and has those hands. That's remarkable, right? There's very few big men who have that kind of skill and those kind of hands. Blake Wheeler had that, but Blake Wheeler had more grit than Tage Thompson. And Blake Wheeler, I would guarantee, was faster at his peak than Tage Thompson was. And my take on it is if Blake Wheeler in his prime and Tage Thompson in his prime were fighting for the puck in the corner, Blake Wheeler would come out with the puck 9 out of 10 times. Blake Wheeler at his peak was not only big and strong and could use the wide open ice, which he still can to this day. If you give Blake wide open ice, he'll burn you. But back then, he didn't even need wide open ice. And he was faster than almost anyone on the ice. He was more skilled. He was bigger. He was stronger. He was driven. He was in shape. And the one thing I'll always say, Ken, and I know you'll get this because if I'm not mistaken, Ken, you were one of the guys who at one point had Blake Wheeler on your Hart Trophy ballot. Did you not?
It would have been under consideration. I don't know if, I would have said possibly the 2018-19 or 17-18 year, 91 points, probably. I definitely had him on my all-star ballot.
I hate to put you on the spot. I thought
it's fine.
Hart
is certainly possible. He was the best player on the second best team in the NHL. So 17-18, I probably had him on the top 5. I would not have had him first.
Yeah.
But I would have had him in the 5. I would have had him in the top 5 for sure. That year he was definitely in the top 5. Yes.
This is a guy who, so that's what I was saying. This is a guy who garnered votes as the best player in the world at one point. And then we talk about like he was the best setup man in the world at one point, and for actually a fairly, if you took and stacked years together for a chunk of years. But the one thing that I always thought, Ken, was interesting is you'd hear about all these great players around the league, and I never at any point thought that Blake Wheeler was the best player in the league. But what I did think about Blake Wheeler is a lot of players came in, like there were nights I saw Sidney Crosby come into town, and Sidney Crosby would have been one of the best, if not the best players in the league. And Blake Wheeler would outcompete him on the ice. Blake Wheeler would be the better player, more impactful player in that game. And what I saw time and time again, and it's kind of like the Byfuglien factor, right? Like no one was saying Byfuglien was the best player, the best defenseman in the league. And, guys would say a guy like Roman Josi was, and then you'd go to the playoffs and the question would be like, in all honesty, who's going to be the more impactful defenseman in this series? Dustin Byfuglien or Roman Josi? It was Dustin Byfuglien, even though Roman Josi would have been thought of as being the better defenseman. And, probably if you stack up the 82 games was, when it comes down to a contest of like who's going to outdo who in the playoffs, Dustin Byfuglien was a better bet than Roman Josi was. And that's what I saw time and time again for a period of time with Blake Wheeler, that no matter who came into town, no matter how good they were, Blake Wheeler was going to come out on top and be the more impactful person in that game. Clearly that faded over the years with his age, as it should. Father Time wins all battles. But I am going on the record as saying there's no doubt in my mind. I think Blake Wheeler is the best at his peak. Winnipeg Jet 2.0. That's the half of it. That's the half where I say this was the hockey player. Now, clearly, something went wrong along the way, right? Yep. It didn't continue on. Blake Wheeler didn't get celebrated. He didn't get moved up into the echelon of the best players in the game. He was given this. And why? It's because of the other stuff. It's because 2018 wasn't the beginning that it should have been. It was the peak. And everything got worse after that. It's the stuff that happened in the room. It's the leadership style that could be grating. It's the way that he interacted with people. Blake Wheeler often chose violence, as the kids will say, when there didn't, in my personal opinion, didn't need to be reason to choose violence. And in the end, Blake Wheeler's being bought out. And you were talking about his contract. People who get all upset about the contract, 55 points at $8.25 million at the tail end of a 5-year contract signed after you had a bargain player for a number of years. Teams don't take that as a loss. The Winnipeg Jets, had there not been extenuating factors, would have been more than happy to bring Blake Wheeler back into the room at that number with the production that they were getting from him. That's not why Blake Wheeler is leaving. Blake Wheeler is leaving because the Winnipeg Jets room clearly does not work. They showed it this year at the end of the year. They showed it with the open revolt they had against their head coach. Their head coach showed it in the frustration that he had all year. And this was a head coach who was trying to drag them out of the pit that they dug themselves in last year and missing the playoffs, did so. And then the team turned away from that. This was a guy who the players, he earned allegiance from the players on the Winnipeg Jets. They basically said at the end of the year that he was still their captain. And so Blake Wheeler's the guy who's been leading them down this road, and the Jets have a problem. And I think it looks like a culture problem. People who leave the dressing room often say it's a culture problem. The people still in that dressing room don't see it. That's a problem in itself. But Blake Wheeler is gone, not because he wasn't a good hockey player at this stage. Blake Wheeler is gone because the Jets need to turn the page. They're getting guys like Rucker McGroarty. Their draft picks reflected picking up Nino Niederreiter's reflected, the Brendan Dillons, the Nate Schmitz. They are trying to turn this team around in how it thinks and talks, and they cannot do that with Blake Wheeler in the room. So Lori Loving Life was not wanting us to get negative. Listen, it's not a positive situation. A buyout is trying to put the stake in the heart of something, and what they are trying to put the stake in the heart of and get out of here is the effect that Blake Wheeler has had on that room as a leader. They're moving on from it because it did not work, and that's why we're where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when Blake Wheeler was the right leader for this group. They were more of a veteran group that had some young stallions in that 2017-18 run, there's no doubt. Blake is a guy who had his game face on, at least when we were around, almost 24/7. It's an individual that obviously worked for him on the ice. And I would also say, if we're at the end and a little bit more, a lot more short and curt at times. There was also a time, Sean, where Blake Wheeler was hands down the most refreshing and open and often insightful interview on the team. When he became captain, the high volume got to be a bit much for him, and things changed a little bit. So, like I said, when we're talking about the big pick, we're talking about a very wide canvas here, 12 seasons. Do I think the Jets, with a bunch of more upbeat kind of personalities, needed a little bit more oxygen? Yes, I do. I mean, it just was time. I mean, Blake's leadership style worked for a long time. It didn't work for everyone. I get that. But Blake was the captain when the Jets had their best season in franchise history. And I don't think it was an accident. And I do think he had a massive role off the ice to go along with those 91 points. But over the years, there were other players that needed to be able to spread their wings, and now they're going to have that opportunity to do so. The first step was last year in removing the C, but I don't think you can fully embrace the additional oxygen without having him leave the room. And, the next thing will be, will Mark Scheifele be on the Jets come the fall to start the year or not? I mean, Mark's also been here a long time, since 2011. So, and a full-time player since 2013. The other thing now with Blake being gone, now the highest paid player is Kyle Connor at 7.1. I mean, we're not going to really touch on free agency that much right at this instant, but that's something to consider as well. See where that goes. I mean, Connor Hellebuck, does that mean he may be open to an extension? I mean, I still think that before this year is over, there's a very good chance both Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuck will be gone, and they could be gone before the season starts, with one phone call. So we'll see where that goes. And I mean, I would also say that, Blake is someone, like I said, we've touched on all sides. He's given a lot, and there were times when he was, incredibly intense, and that didn't lead to great situations, whether that was with his teammates or whether that was with members of the media. But like in any 12-year relationship, there are going to be ups and downs. I would also say this. I mean, back during the lockout, when I was back at the Winnipeg Sun and Post Media, I went down to Minnesota for an interview with Dustin Byfuglien. He didn't show up. He was out hunting, and Blake sat down with me for 35 minutes on a bench outside an arena at St. Louis Park. He could not have been more generous with his time. He was very courteous. The interview was great. He allowed me to have a great story on a day that I could have had nothing, when Dustin Byfuglien didn't show up for an interview that was set up. I was able to get Byfuglien 2 days later, but that was a really nice conversation with the guy who was never that open afterward, just because the circumstances were different. But, again, that's neither here nor there. I'm thankful for the time that Blake gave. I didn't have any real run-ins with him, but I know others in the media did. And, that's a different situation. And, those things happen when there are intense people involved. But, at the end of the day, it's just time to move on, right? I mean, for both sides. So, I mean, that's my overriding belief for today. Lots for Blake to be celebrated with during the course of his career. And like I said, there was celebration in the video and the press release, and there will be a lengthy video when he rolls into town with his new team, and all of those things are deserved. But, that's the way she goes.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because we should probably talk a little bit about that. I mean, this is one of the things we try to bring insight and in behind our jobs. So, Ken, you're talking about not ever really having a lot of run-in.
Not a serious blow-up with him anyway.
No serious blow-ups. I mean, I would think that I don't think it would be a secret. You know what? It's probably not even a secret just in this. Like, if you watch the full-on scrums on Jets TV, like if you're one of the people who picks all those kind of things up and listens to each of the individual questions that we all ask and all those kinds of things, I think people would be pretty understanding that I rubbed Blake Wheeler the wrong way. Am I being fair in saying that, Ken? Like, I would think it was fairly common knowledge in the media that the media, my fellow media members, felt that Blake Wheeler didn't think that highly of me. Is that fair to say?
I think that you two had a couple of, I wouldn't say massive blow-ups, but there was certainly some tension at times that was displayed on both sides. I would say there was some tension at times on both fronts. There was a time where I would say, and I don't think that I'm being unfair, I would say that no matter what you asked, I think there was a certain level of there was a different tone at times. I would say. I don't know.
I mean, to me, it could be borderline disdain at times. I don't have
Sure.
trouble talking about this, right?
Sure.
Like I have no trouble talking about this. Like at the beginning, as a reporter, when you're getting a negative response back from a player time and time again, I think you spend a lot of your time thinking, am I doing something wrong? Am I doing this? Am I doing that? What could I do better? How could I bridge that gap? That's your job. And I think I did that for a while. And I think sometimes you just have to get to a place where you're like, I don't think there's anything that I'm going to do to reach this person. Right. And so I think I was one of those people. So, I mean, I learned in the end, if you wanted to get a clip where Blake wasn't firing off and blowing up, well, you would ask him about his teammates, right? You would ask him about someone else, and then he would go off with his teammates. But he would challenge me at almost every turn. I remember the one time for a while there when I would ask questions and let's be honest, can you refer to me as a pit bull sometimes? I do know that I have a tendency to ask extremely direct questions, right?
You're just looking for headlines, Sean. You're just looking for headlines.
According
to let me interject a Blake Wheeler special to you.
There you go. And that's what Blake would say is I was just looking for headlines. And my retort to that was like, we're journalists. We're not looking for back page news. I'm going to ask you about the biggest, most important thing, right? I did have a back and forth with him, in which his response, I believe, was oh yeah, you're a journalist or something like that. It was mocking. It was basically him suggesting that I'm not a very good journalist. Some people will be on board with that. I take pride in my journalism. I take pride with how I take my job. To me, that was a sign of a man in his 30s who is trying to take pot shots for just the simple case of taking pot shots, for just the simple case of lashing out. Okay.
Yep.
So to me, that's one of those things. And listen, because I'm on the other side of it, my opinion, other people are going to look at it and say it's colored because I was the other person on the other side of a little bit of a grind with a player. So my opinion doesn't count. But my opinion in all of this is I tried very hard to get to the other side of that. I don't think I ever did. I became accepting that wasn't going to happen. I just still continued on to do my job. But I do, and this is my opinion, and people have in the past dove into how I do my job, that we're journalists. It's public, it's on record, so they can do that. I think there was a maturity lacking in Blake Wheeler, that he felt the need to lash out at people, to take pot shots, to kind of conduct himself like a petulant teenager at times. Like, I mean, the interview that he had that one time with Hammy, where he came out and he said, well, are we going to get into a pissing contest? Like, Hammy was there asking his questions. He was there doing his job. This is his job. He wasn't prying. He wasn't saying anything insulting. We go back to him telling Paul Friesen to F off. I've said this time and time again. Of the four major sports, there's 120 captains spread across baseball, football, basketball. The vast majority of them can get through their responsibilities as a captain without telling someone to F off or without taking, verbal pot shots at people. Blake Wheeler couldn't do that. Even as a mature father of three, he just couldn't quite get to the place where he could have a civil conversation with someone without saying, without firing or lobbing an insult at someone. He just couldn't do it. It wasn't in him. So I mean, that's part of it, but I do think that for anyone who is looking for the leadership style, because there was a good conversation, there was a good comment that was made here. Rain Man here says, how did Wheeler's leadership style lead to a room with zero accountability? This is the wrong one. Someone was asking about the idea of Blake Wheeler as the kind of leader who was, Paul Maurice would say this about him all the time. Paul Maurice would say, if you're a young player and you're walking in here and you see how hard that guy works, you just get dragged into it. And I think that's 100% true. Blake's leadership style was a personal accountability he held himself to. And if you held yourself to that same personal accountability, you were going to be a good player. My argument to that is that's not all leadership is. What we heard so much about the Jets recent first round pick is that this, Sammy talked about it. Jay Bukala talked about it. This is a guy who goes around the room and makes sure everything is working for everybody. And he's talking with the coaches and he's talking with the equipment staff and he's making everything work. That's not a Blake Wheeler style. Blake Wheeler's style was, take care of your own house, take care of your SHIT. And this is how it's going to go here. But that harsh style does not necessarily work for everybody. And I would say this, sometimes as a captain, maybe you need to be hard. Sometimes you maybe need to be supporting. Sometimes you maybe need to be loving. Sometimes you may need to be stern. There's certain levels of that rainbow of leadership I just don't think Blake Wheeler is capable of. And I think those weaknesses showed over the years in his leadership style and ultimately the culture of this team.
Yeah, right on. Glad you were able to share some of that personal insight. We got to rip through some sponsors here. We're 45 minutes in.
Let's get at it. So let's talk about our summertime friends in the keg. We'll start with them. If you're looking to get out and celebrate this summer or not even celebrate, hey, if you're just looking to celebrate a good meal, we know you'll get one if you head on down and see our friends at the keg. Go check them out. Happy to have them on board. And of course, I was thinking this today, Ken, good roofers you can set a watch by. You couldn't set a watch by my travel today. I'm going to see if Pristine Roofing wants to open up a travel arm because they are rain, snow, or shine. They come and they take care of business. I could have used a little bit of that today, and I wouldn't be doing this podcast out of this hotel room today. And probably all the people who've showed up multiple times today to take a look at when our pod was going to be on wouldn't have had to wait around as much as they did if Pristine was running the trains out there. I'll tell you that much. Of course, I want to give Home Field a shout out. They do absolutely great work with us. Like I said, our intro and our extra video, they took care of that. It's a thing of beauty. Absolutely love it. Give a shout out to our good friends at the Johnston Group, the Kenny and Renny OGs. They have been there since the beginning. Every single time we talk to them, they are there ready to go. We have to get out golfing with those guys this year. We say it every year. If you're listening right now, it's been Kenny who's making a follow through. I've been sitting, waiting with my left-handed golf glove on that everyone makes fun of me for. I should be wearing it on the other hand. Ready to go, you guys. Just get Kenny going here. Ken, you want to give Sweet Lou Furlan a shout out?
Yeah, for all the folks looking for help in the realty market, buying, selling, curious about what the house on the corner is worth, contact Lou Furlan or Royal LePage Dynamic Realty, 204-791-9971, or at the office, 204-989-5000. His email is lou@loufurlan.ca. That's LOUFURLAN.ca. And his website is www.loufurlan.ca. Lou Furlan, excellent realtor, excellent human being, and excellent supporter of this community, including our podcast.
Excellent. And you know what we're going to launch in? We're going to give away some of the nectar of the gods here because we've got some
did you find
packs to give away. I found one. I'm going to take
during your delay.
Show.
Good, nice.
Of course, TransCanada Brewing Company, Lamplighter Amber Ale, the nectar of the gods. We absolutely love this stuff. I'm sure any of you who came out to the Kenny and Renny live show and tried it love it as well. I'm going to hand this one out to just, this is a selfish pick on my part. It's selfish because I'm going to give this to T. Will because I'm sick of him complaining about never winning the Lamplighter. T. Will says, I feel like Renny and I have the same relationship. No matter how nice I am to him, I don't think he's going to like me. Of course, I haven't tried yet, but here you go, buddy. It's the olive branch. You whined and you complained enough. You texted me enough times over and over again here. T. Will, get a hold of me. You finally, before the season closed out, won yourself an 8-pack of frosty, delicious Lamplighter Amber Ale, brought to you by our friends from TransCanada Brewing Company. You know what to do. Direct message me. You've got my text. I can't believe I let
buddy.
It
One more.
One more. Anyway,
tomorrow we'll be rocking this, boys. We'll be rocking it.
You bet. You'll see us with the Vittorio tomorrow. If you want to, hey, I'm just going to take this off the screen just for a second and be like, you've seen me in the past and how good I look. I can tell you right now, Connor Bedard wouldn't walk up to me right now and be like, nice Superman shirt. I think he'd pull out a couple quarters and give me some change. This is what I look like when Frankie and the boys don't take care of me. If you look like this right now and you want to do something about it, head on down to Corden Avenue, see Frankie and the boys, tell them Kenny and Renny sent you. They'll do you up nice. Absolutely good stuff. Ken, where do you want to go? I think you want to talk a little bit about free agency heading into it.
Yeah, I think we should just touch on it. A couple things. I know some people are kind of curious. The three players who were not given qualifying offers today and will become unrestricted free agents are Kevin Stenlund, fourth line center, goaltending prospect from Sweden, Arvid Holm, and Alex Limoges. Actually had a pretty solid season with the Manitoba Moose in the American Hockey League last year. So Leon Gavanka was given a qualifying offer. He's signed to play over in Germany for the next year or two, maybe I think multiple years. But the reason the Jets do that is because if he wants to come back, it doesn't cost them anything. So it's a smart move for them. I mean, if he comes back and develops and is ready to become an NHL player, they'll at least have the opportunity to either bring him in or have his rights to trade to someone else. So that's the reasoning there. Stenlund, is it a surprise? I mean, Rick Bowness really leaned on him in terms of the right-handed face-offs throughout the course of the year. I think Kevin did show some upside in terms of his offense at times. We saw it more in practice than in the games. But, guy played pretty hard. I think you could make the case for him as a fourth-line center for the Winnipeg Jets. But to me, this kind of signals that all of the sweat equity they've invested in homegrown product, David Gustafsson, to me, that means that he's probably going to have that job unless the Jets are planning to get somebody else. And one of the interesting things, the developments of today, I mean, Morgan Geekie, a Manitoba product who played for the Seattle Kraken, is a UFA today or tomorrow morning after both he and Daniel Sprong were not qualified by the Seattle Kraken. So I could see Geekie as a right-hand shot, can play center, can play right wing. I could see him...
Before you continue on, sorry,
Yeah.
Ken, to interrupt. I'm just going to interject because I know you're going to pick up again. This is just this. You heard this on Kenny and Renny yesterday. Elliot Friedman came on here and he said, like, everyone's talking about this as being not a very deep UFA class. Just wait until tomorrow. A lot of guys aren't going to get qualified, and it's going to be an entirely different market. So what Kenny's breaking down for you and doing a great job of right here is something that you should have expected, because Kenny and Renny brought Elliot Friedman on here, who absolutely blew this open. Talk about batting 1,000. That we saw that from Sammy over the weekend, and then over the draft, coming in and just absolutely nailing all his analysis of all the picks. And then you get Elliot Friedman, who comes in here and looks into his crystal ball and tells you everything that we're basing everything on today. Great job by him looking into the future. Keep doing what you're doing, Ken. You're rocking it.
Yeah, and a quick one here. So folks were wondering what this meant here for the Winnipeg Jets. So as of today, according to Cap Friendly, the Jets' projected cap hit is $69 million, just over 69. Their projected cap space is $14.5 million. But that's only for 15 out of 23 players. And let's not forget the RFAs who need new deals: Morgan Barron, Rasmus Kapari, Gabe Velarde, Dylan Samberg, Logan Stanley. We'll see what happens with him. I'm not certain he starts the year with the Jets. Because Perfetti ended the year on IR, his cap number would still count. He wasn't on LTIR. So there is money to spend in free agency, Sean, but there's not as much as, like, people see that 14.5 and think, whoa, what a ton of cap space. Well, yeah, once the Jets are starting to replace players or extend players, there isn't quite as much money as you might think of when you're looking up at that board. And we should also mention the good folks at Cap Friendly also pointed this out in the last little while here. A lot of people piling on at the deadline about the Jets not adding another player. And I said it myself, I thought they should have made a change on defense. They didn't end up they ended up having less than $800,000 in terms of cap space because of the bonuses paid out to both Cole Perfetti and Dylan Samberg. So, there wasn't as much cap room, and the Jets still were essentially a cap ceiling team last year. So, and I expect them to continue to be pretty close to the cap ceiling going forward here. Sean, I'm very curious, as are you, and will Vladislav Nemesnikov find something appealing in another market, or will he lock down with the Jets? Will they have to replace? I posted my free agency story column in the comment section earlier. It's we don't expect them to buy in the big ticket item aisle, but we're still not sure if Scheifele or Connor Hellebuyck eventually need to be replaced. So, that's a pretty big difference in terms of what you might know. And sorry, another one of the names, I mean, we asked Sammy yesterday because of the links to the New Jersey Devils. We asked him about Mike McLeod. He is also an unrestricted free agent after, I believe, the Devils failed to qualify him. So I wonder if he might be a guy who the Jets could kick the tires on. He wouldn't be making big dollars, as a bottom six guy with some upside. I could see that happening as well, but we'll see. I don't expect it to be fast and furious, but I'm super curious, and I've been saying this all week on all of our shows, Sean. I think the Jets will be looking into Jonas Korpisalo. I mean, there's going to be other teams. Ottawa, I believe, will be one of them. Bruce Garriock, my old colleague from the Ottawa Sun, I believe, has mentioned Korpisalo. I think Korpisalo makes sense for a team like the Carolina Hurricanes in a job share with Pyotr Kochetkov. We'll see, but those are some of the places where I could see it making sense. A lot of the projections have Korpisalo in maybe that $3 or $4 million range. Aiden Hill off the board now. Now that deal is official that Elliott broke. 2 years at 4.9 AAV for Aiden Hill, who had such a great playoff for the Vegas Golden Knights. So that'll be interesting to see. Like I said, I mean, we talked about culture a lot today, Sean. I mean, my affinity for Ryan O'Reilly. I think that at a time when the Jets are trying to crank things over, I think Ryan O'Reilly would be a great person to bring in. I don't know what kind of length of term he wants on a contract at 32 years old. I know there were some injuries last year, but for a team looking at different leadership voices, I think Ryan O'Reilly will be a great fit wherever he signs. I don't think it will be with Winnipeg, but that would be someone that I would be making a phone call to, at least to find out what the cost would be, on whether it's a 3-year deal or whatever you could get it on. But other than that, I mean, Nemesnikov is someone I'm watching. I'm curious about the goaltending. We know for sure, Sean, what do we know for sure? The Jets will be looking at a backup goalie. Joey Decord is a guy that I mentioned as a possibility after a great year with Coachella Valley in the American Hockey League, just losing out in Game 7 to the Hershey Bears. Kudos to Todd Nelson and his crew there, the primary affiliate of the Washington Capitals. Decord re-signed a 2-year deal this evening, I believe, with Seattle, so he is off the board as well. Curious about Alex Lyon. Basically saved the Panthers season, but he doesn't have a ton of NHL time on his resume. I could see him being a potential number 2 here, depending on what happens with the number 1. But we'll see what happens there. What are you looking for in free agency, Sean? Where do you think that? And also, too, I mean, Craig Zamzo mentioned it. I mean, I still think the Jets' defense needs to be addressed. Yeah, I think the Jets' defense needs to be addressed. Yeah. I think that once we hit July 1st, which will happen on Saturday, I think we'll have it. I don't think it will happen immediately, but I think we'll have a much better idea where the Jets stand with Dylan DeMello and Brendan Dillon. I think those are 2 guys that are big-time character pieces for the Winnipeg Jets. They will be eligible for extensions, along with Nino Niederreiter, another guy I think the Jets would like to keep around longer term. But I think the Jets have to change their mix on the back end. I think there's a lot of good pieces on the back end. They just haven't fit overly well together at times over the last couple of years. And now there is a big-time surplus with Declan Chisholm now not being waiver exempt. And I just don't see a scenario where it makes any sense to send Ville Heinola back to the Manitoba Moose this year, even though he is waiver exempt for 1 more year because of the entry-level slide. If he's not going to be in the 6 for the Jets, he should be moved.
We got to that. We've had that conversation. I think we said something similar to about Nick Ehlers and the idea of if the Jets can't really figure out how it is that they want to use him, maybe they should be moving him along. I just bring that up. There's a couple of those situations that have percolated where I do think the Jets have the tendency to hang on to assets for too long and not use them to their maximum potential, and in doing so kind of lose them. I do think other teams are a little more, and I'm going to say it, I think the other teams are a little more humane with NHL players at times, where they're like, listen, we're getting in the way of this kid chasing their dreams. Let's let them go and see what's out there for them. Whereas I think the Jets usually are like, they will hold on to the fruit until it potentially dies on the vine and then moves on. And, sometimes confidence can be ruined. Sometimes the league looks at those players differently after a long time. I would agree with you there. scaling back to Nemestikov, which you talked about, I think he's a fascinating one because usually what happens is teams come to the Jets. They seem to, because Kevin Cheveldayoff, give him credit where credit is due, seems to really be able to go out and grab players that fit in when he brings them in. I mean, Nino Niederreiter was a great pickup. Nemestikov became everything that you could hope he could be. Kevin Hayes came rolling into Winnipeg, and even though it didn't work out that well, he got that big contract afterwards. Paul Stanley,
ready for the Kiss tour, buddy. Get ready for the Kiss tour. Logan Stanley.
No, Paul Stastny came in and did that the first time, came from St. Louis, came to Winnipeg, turned that into a big contract with Vegas. Like that seems to happen. So if Vladdy Nemestikov did the same thing, he comes to Winnipeg and gets the league looking at him in a different light. It would be very normal. It would actually be the norm for him to come do that and move and go elsewhere. If I were Vladdy Nemestikov, I'd really be looking at what my career has been bouncing around the league up until this point, and then finding this place with this coach in a city that appreciates him, a coach that absolutely adores him and wants him here and knows that he'll use him well. If you're Vladdy Nemestikov and you're sick of bouncing around, I think there's a place here where you can settle down, put down roots, and have a very satisfying hockey career on a team that really values you. So if I were Vladdy Nemestikov, I would be looking really seriously at staying in Winnipeg. The one thing I'll say about this, I'm not going to get into a whole bunch of individual players.
Vladdy. I've been on the Vladdy train for a long time, especially you talked about Ehlers. Ehlers is ready for more, and he found great chemistry with Nemestikov.
Yeah. So what I will say about this is the Winnipeg Jets are intent on retooling. And this is one of those things. Remember a couple of years ago when the Jets were both going to be buyers and sellers at the trade deadline? And I remember we talked about it on this podcast, and I was like, I don't think it's possible. If it was possible, other GMs would be doing it all the time, and I couldn't really think of examples. Now he tried it, and he did. He sold well, right? But he ended up moving Andrew Kopp, ended up getting a great asset for it. That's why you've got not Chaz Lucius. That's why you've got Brad Lambert in the prospect pool now, is because of that deal that he made. It's also the year that he didn't move on from Paul Stastny, not the lead singer of Kiss, in that situation where they could have got some assets. And what they did bring in was Stanford. Is that
Zach Sanford?
Zach Sanford brought in, and that wasn't enough, right? Like that didn't fill the hole that was there. So in the end, he tried it. Parts of it he succeeded, but he didn't pull off the we bought and sold at the same time, and it didn't affect us. The Jets were a lesser team without Andrew Kopp after they moved him. I felt it very similar with the idea here. I didn't think it was going to be possible for the Jets to do this and to retool, but the PLD move to me kind of signals that they're somewhat pulling it off. In that deal, they got both futures and presents, right? That they're able to kind of apply going forward. I'll say this about the market with the UFA market suddenly being flooded because of a whole bunch of people aren't being qualified. The potential to retool, to build yourself, and I've been using the LA Kings as kind of a model before this, but maybe a better one is where Geeky is coming from is the Seattle Kraken, right? The Jets are going to be a lot like the Seattle Kraken. Jack, you just basically pulled this thought out of my brain and put it up on the screen. Young, fast, and hard to play against after these moves. This is kind of what I see the Jets would be capable of doing here on the free agency market, because there's not a lot of money going around. And so not all these players are going to be able to go to where they want to go. And the Winnipeg Jets really could take a run at doing exactly what Jack just said there about the Seattle Kraken. The Seattle Kraken knocked off the Stanley Cup champs, who, yes, they had injuries. Yes, there were issues. But the one thing I loved about the Seattle Kraken at every turn in their first two rounds of the playoffs is they bounced back. When things were tough, this was not a team that broke easily. They had good culture. They had good mental fortitude, and they stuck together and they played hard and they played well. They gave Colorado everything they could handle until they sent them out of the playoffs, and then did the same thing with the, a very tough Dallas Stars team, gave them all they could handle. The Jets, I think, could go and do the retooling part that they're trying to do here right now with the UFA market the way that it exists, because I think there's an opportunity here that really hasn't existed before. Just a wide swath of players that are good players, not maybe marquee guys, but guys that you're like, that guy is the third line left winger. That works. That's an upgrade. I think they could do that. I think they could build their fourth line. I think they could become a Seattle Kraken-like team that's tough to play against. They've got the head coach with the plan who knows how to do it. And then what that would mean is they could move Connor Hellebuyck, and it would open up the freedom or the ability to move Connor Hellebuyck and move Mark Scheifele potentially for good future assets, which I always thought would be the best way to handle those trades. And I think that what we've seen and what we heard down here, Ken, you were hearing the same thing that I was when I was down in Nashville, was that people kind of cooled on the Connor Hellebuyck when the price tag came out. There wasn't a lot of buzz about Scheifele. I think there wasn't a lot of buzz about Scheifele because what is being asked for by Kevin Cheveldayoff is the now. So if you want to add Mark Scheifele, you're trying to have him put you over the top to win a cup. You don't want to give away 2 or 3 players that take away from the ability to do that. So, but if Kevin Cheveldayoff handles free agency right and is able to kind of build that grinding team that has a really good base of compete and depth that he can add to at a later date if he wants, then all of a sudden now he can go back and all the people he's been talking to about Mark Scheifele, he's like, you know how you were offering us those younger guys? Let's start talking about that again. Let's see what you've got there. And then maybe what he could do is he could make moves for players like Connor Hellebuyck and Mark Scheifele that aren't necessarily going to help the Jets next year, aren't going to be part of the retool. But if the retool is done with the PLD trade and with the free agency, and then you can go and move Scheifele and Hellebuyck and get some guys who are just a couple of years away, well, then you've got a good, gritty, competing Winnipeg Jets team who's going to fight to get into the playoffs with a whole host of young prospects coming up, and that starts to look really, really attractive. I think there's an opportunity here for Kevin Cheveldayoff to do exactly what this organization has said its mandate is. I didn't think there was a path to pulling it off. I now clearly see a path to pulling it off.
Yeah, and they're well down that path. So, I'm very curious to see. Again, we're not expecting a ton of activity. It rarely happens that way. But what I do expect is that Kevin Cheveldayoff is going to go shopping for his next Matthew Perreault, right? A guy who was not qualified by the Anaheim Ducks, signed a 3-year deal worth $9 million, $3 million AAV. A guy who ended up being just an absolute grand slam for this team, playing on all 4 lines and, really having a big impact on the organization. Signed another, big ticket 4-year, $16 million deal after that. So interesting. Scheifele, I was wondering about Scheifele. I know it's been mentioned out there a few times. I believe our pal Nick Linham mentioned the Scheifele train for Seattle, wondering where things were at with that. Shane Wright is an interesting. It would be an interesting. Jack is definitely on the. He's very well versed with Seattle. That would be a very interesting maneuver. I don't know how the Jets feel about Shane Wright. We know our pal Sam Cosentino is a big fan of his game from watching him very closely over the years. It would be certainly, they would also be able to afford the next contract. Now, I don't know about the term for Ron Francis. I mean, based on how things went in Carolina at times, the term wasn't always necessarily, but if you go higher, what if you go higher AAV on a 5-year term? Maybe it makes sense for Seattle. Super interesting. And for me, that's a team that I haven't mentioned before, but, hat tip to Nick. I believe he mentioned Seattle, and in a lot of ways it makes sense. Then you can allow Matty Beniers to grow. You give him a little bit of insulation. I know they had some guys who played really well this last year, no doubt about that, including Jared McCann. You can play McCann on the wing if you want. Definitely goal scoring is one of the things that Seattle doesn't do as well, but, Dave Hackstall, maybe he can get Mark to get a little bit more on that 200-foot train. But when you have a lot of, very good defensive players, I'm not saying it's not as important, but it's easier to have a little bit more backing when you play with the great structure that Seattle plays with. So, I mean, that's super interesting.
To that point too, Ken, if you take a look at that, a team that plays as consistently together in that defensive style that the Seattle Kraken do, if they were to pick up a Mark Scheifele, not playing that style stands out.
Oh, same as Carolina. That's why I mentioned Carolina. Yeah. Same idea.
When 22 guys are committed to doing one thing and you're not doing it, there's a little bit of you're not fitting in, and it's obvious, and we can see it, but you can see it too. And the tendency for players is to try and fit in a situation like that. And this goes to what I've been saying for a long time. Like someone was asking just a little bit earlier if the 17-18 version of Mark Scheifele is long gone. I don't think it is. I think everything that we've been talking about when it comes to the Jets culture, Mark Scheifele is a part of that. But I think sometimes the guys who are kind of, the leaders of that culture are also the victims of that same culture that they've created, right? But if you can get them out of that and teach them a different way, I've been a big believer, and I've said this, I do think that if a team goes after Mark Scheifele, he could be the offseason steal. I truly believe that Mark Scheifele, in the right situation next year, could be a 90 to 100 point player. I truly believe that. I mean, he's been an 82-point player every single year except for this last year, extrapolated, based on injuries and whatever. But like 90 isn't a far cry. I know he went down last year a little bit, but to me, if you take a player and move him, and again, the importance of this is A, a contender, and B, a team that is going to be able to convince Mark to be the Mark Scheifele of old, or the Mark Scheifele that buys into something like that. ZTM says the way this team is being built, it might complement 55's game well, where you want to keep him long term. Here's my take on this, Ken. I think Mark Scheifele has made up his mind that he's gone. Like everyone who's talking about, the potential for this, everything that I've heard is that ship has sailed, right? And I don't know that what is happening here. I don't know that Blake Wheeler moving on, all his friends over the years moving on, says to me that he's going to stop and be like, oh, well, Gabe Velarde's here and this guy's here. Okay, I think I'll stick around. I think that ship has sailed. I think that ship has sailed with Connor Hellebuyck as well. Just to get back to it and close out that point, a player like Mark Scheifele may be exactly the offensive linchpin that the Seattle Kraken are looking for. And the Seattle Kraken, from what I saw of how they stuck together and played last year in the playoffs, I think that team culture would be more powerful enough to bring Mark Scheifele in and absorb and change him into that culture. So if you can change Mark Scheifele into the culture that we saw and was displayed by the Seattle Kraken, and then have him freed up to add that offensive acumen we've seen from him over the time, that would be, in my mind, a potential slam dunk and a franchise altering, most definitely a franchise boosting move for a team like the Seattle Kraken.
Totally fair, but Turd Ferguson also makes a good point here. Didn't exactly.
Turd Ferguson never makes good points.
Hey, this is an important one here that I did not see initially. And
very good point.
Dave Lowry is not the head coach in Seattle, but I don't believe that things. We know that things didn't go well with Mark Scheifele and Dave Lowry. So I mean,
maybe Dave Lowry having a little bit more muscle and support behind him in this situation would allow that to work. And in the end, it's not Dave Lowry's choice; it would be Dave Hackstall. So maybe Dave Hackstall would be the guy who brokers a peace treaty between the two and gets them on the same page.
Fair enough. Yeah. Like I said, I wasn't dismissing it. It was
no, you weren't. But you're right. Turd Ferguson did actually.
That's something we cannot ignore. We cannot ignore that.
We cannot. Here we go. Turd Ferguson says Turd is full of good points. Some nuts, sometimes corn. Okay. Now we know about Turd Ferguson's diet. Okay, we're going to shut this down here, Ken. Great job making this happen and getting out here and making it work. Our audience, again, surprised by how many people are in the chat room. And I say that not because you guys don't consistently bring it, because we basically played a game of hide and seek on the internet with you today, made it as hard as possible to find out when this show was going to happen. So thank you so much for sticking with us and outlasting us in that game of hide and seek, finding us and sticking with us here. We really appreciate that. I'm going to end this show the way I do end all our shows, and that is by saying, if you appreciate the conversations happening in these spaces, please appreciate our sponsors who fight to keep these conversations going for us. That's the Keg, Pristine Roofing, Home Field, Trans-Canada Brewing Company, the Johnston Group, Lou Ferlin, and Vittorio Rossi. Thank you so much to them. Thank you to you, Ken. You rocked it as usual. I got to say this, Ken. I'm just going to give you a shout out. It is very, very calming, nice to have a partner that I know when we hit these kind of shows where we're hitting what happened with Blake Wheeler, maybe touching on what just happened with the draft, maybe touching on what's happening in free agency tomorrow, touching on the potential landing spots going forward for the other deals that the Jets have to make, touching on qualifying offers and all that kind of stuff. It is so great to have a partner like you who is always absolutely on top of it. It gives me so much confidence to jump on and do these things. I appreciate you, buddy. And finally,
thank you. Very kind. Sorry, state of survival. Read my column about free agency. Scott Mayfield has been mentioned.
Yeah, no doubt. And yes, finally, lastly, I talked a little bit off the top, but our audience always give us far more than we deserve, and you did today by finding us and making sure this happened. Thank you so much. We hope we made it worth your while. We did everything we could to make it worth your while. We appreciate you. We will see you. We're going to wrap something up tomorrow, after the
expectation is that we will do a show tomorrow as well.
And I'm going to say it again. I think there's opportunity that's existed in unrestricted free agency like it never has before for the Winnipeg Jets. We'll see what kind of day that they have tomorrow. See you then and after then, everybody. We'll see you on the TV tomorrow.
The Kenny and Renny Show is brought to you by Home Field, Cambrian Credit Union, Lou Ferlin, Trans-Canada Brewing, Vittorio Rossi, and Johnston Group.